Good afternoon, and welcome to our latest in the series of Bringing Life to Scholarship Symposia. We're pleased to have with us today Dr. Todd Zakrajsek, who will be presenting on the topic of overcoming apathy in the classroom. Dr. Zakrajsek is the inaugural director of the Faculty Center for Innovative Teaching, or FACET, here at Central Michigan University. Previously, Dr. Zakrajsek was the founding director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Southern Oregon University, where he also taught in the psychology department as a tenured associate professor. Dr. Zakrajsek is the author of 2 introductory psychology instructor's manuals and a student study guide. He received his Doctor of Philosophy degree in industrial and organizational psychology from Ohio University. He currently teaches here at CMU the psychology of learning and memory, statistics, and a graduate seminar. He has published and presented widely on the topic of student learning, including workshops and keynote addresses in 25 states and several foreign countries. Again, we are proud and we are pleased to have Dr. Zakrajsek with us, and I ask you to give him a warm welcome. Dr. Zakrajsek.
Thank you. Okay. So my task for today, I think, is to give a little bit of information about apathy in the classroom. And yes, for those of you who don't care, you can go ahead and comment on that. I sent the email out across campus, and immediately from one of my colleagues in the psychology department got a "I don't care" right back. I was sleepy enough I didn't catch what he was referring to, so I called him and apologized for bothering him with even more emails. So I'm having trouble with that one. Apparently there is, most of this boils down to either apathy or ignorance, and apparently we don't know and we don't care. So that's what we're going for. The biggest thing is when I present this type of stuff, it comes across a little bit like a motivational speaker or an infomercial, because I move around a lot and I talk real fast, but I just get really excited about some of these concepts, and so I'm going to go that route. But I want us to have a little bit of fun, and I'm going to ask you to do some things. I apologize right up front for the cameraman, because this is not an easy task, because I'll move around a lot, but it actually keeps him awake too, which is kind of cool, because otherwise I'd be standing in one spot and that's no good. I'm also going to have you work on some things, so we'll have some microphones and we'll move those around a little bit too, which is be a little bit challenging, and I realize this will be a little bit challenging for capturing for the archive, but what I really want is I want to treat this like a classroom situation. And I'm hopeful that when we're done, there's some things that you can learn by watching this and saying, okay, I can see as a student, which you are today, I can see as a student that, this didn't work so well, or that was kind of neat. Certain parts of this might drag a little, other parts might be, time goes by like that. So that's what I want, is for this to be like a classroom situation. So let's play around with that just a little bit. I have some handouts here. I will just do one on each side, and you guys can be responsible for distributing these to the other folks. There you go. Just hand those out. Let me mention where this all came from. I think this is a very important thing to kind of get you rolling. I was guest lecturing in a class recently. I teach an introductory psychology class every other year with 200 students, so I keep teaching and trying different things out. But then I do quite a bit of guest lecturing also. In fact, I've guest lectured in this building several times. But I was guest lecturing, and the topic was on student engagement. And I thought, well, what I need to do is have some way to really get the students engaged. So I tried this, and I thought it was kind of cool. I apologize if anybody in here has seen this. If you do know what I'm going to be doing with this little borderline magic trick, please just keep it to yourself for just a minute. I'll be done with it in a second. But I think today's the perfect day to do this. I just need to write out, see, there's a little piece of paper here with nothing on it, right? Now take this. I'm just going to, I need a trustworthy individual. There you go. Don't touch that yet. It's nothing personal. It's what Tom said. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. It's a quick little trick. I did this in the class, and I'm showing you, and I know a couple of you see it. I'm showing you because I actually did this in class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this article, and I'm going to cut it, but I'm not even going to look at it here. I'm going to move over here like this, and you tell me where to cut. So just somebody say cut. Oh, you want me to move up, down, right there, up a little, right there? Okay, now watch. Stay away from it. Now I need somebody, you look trustworthy, you pick that up and tell the first word on this article. Okay, this is great.
Goodwill.
Goodwill. Okay, you ready for this? Now go ahead and turn that card over, and what did I write on that card? Goodwill. Goodwill. That feeling right there, see? Now, here's what I'm after. That feeling right there of thinking, ooh, that's kind of cool. And how many of you think that's kind of a neat thing? Does anybody think that's kind of a neat thing? How many of you would like to know how I did that? Anybody want to know? Okay. I did that in class. It is magic. It's not just magic, it's magic. I did it in the class. There were about 20 students in the class. And I thought, okay, and what I was going to do is get the students all excited. And I said, okay, how many of you would like to now know how I did that? And they all kind of sat there like this. I said, any of you? And they were almost horizontal in their seats, which still amazes me how they do that. They're sitting there and it's like that. And finally, one young lady, after about 30 seconds, said, I guess if you want to tell me, I don't care. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if there's kind of like a sleight of hand magic trick and I can't even get them interested in that, how am I going to get them interested in the other stuff? So at that point I said, okay, if nobody else cares, you just see me afterwards and I'll tell you. And as I started to move on, another young man sat next to us, okay, I guess I want to know too. And I said, you do? And I said, okay, let's try one more time. How many of you want to know? No hands went up. I said, okay, just the two of you, we'll do it afterwards. And then finally I stopped and said, wait a minute, seriously, just quit messing around. How many would really like to know? And every one of their hands went up. They all wanted to know. And the reason I'm mentioning this at the very, very beginning is that it's really, really hard to know what somebody is thinking by just looking at them. And one of the things that we're facing right now is when we're doing our classes, we're always presenters, and the audience are the students, and we gauge when do we move forward, when do we stop, how do we do another example, whatever, based on the reactions. And if the students are really engaged in the material, I know when to move forward because heads are nodding. I know when to stop because people look confused. I know what to do. But if their mentality is to look disinterested because to look too eager is kind of nerdy, now their job is to just look disinterested. And my brother used to actually, when he came home from school, I remember he used to hide books underneath his coat so his friends wouldn't know he was studying. And if that's the mentality, it makes teaching really difficult. So that's what we're after. We want to figure out how can we generate that interest that you can have and somehow gauge with the students and figure out what's going on there. So we're going to try several different things. Now, next thing up for bids here.
So how'd you do it?
Oh, that's not important. The point of the trick is that you kind of, all right, I'll tell you what, if you remember at the end and ask me, I'll show you. See, I don't care. The cool part is I don't know if you really want to know or not. You're expressing that you do, and you might think you want to know, but at the end of the session, if you remember to ask me, then you really did want to know. But if you forget and walk out the door, you really didn't want to know that much. So we're going to play it that way. It reminds me back about 25 years ago, back when, remember chalkboards? Student one time and I got into a discussion and we were on two different sides of an issue and we had all these pros and cons and finally I put a check mark on one side and said, we're going to go with this side and we're going to move forward. And it was my side and he said, whoa, wait a minute, so what makes you right? And I said, I've got the chalk. So 20 years later, I got a clicker. Oops. That kind of backfired. Okay. So first question I want to ask you, and I'll ask you as a group now, and this is going to have to be tricky because of the microphone situation, but I'm going to flip this around a little bit. I love to look at issues by actually looking at the opposite side. So one of the first things I could ask, and what I can do is I'll repeat it. That should work, is when you ask a question, I'll just repeat it so the microphone stuff. What can we actually do to make a course boring? Suppose you had a task of boring the heck out of your students and keeping them from learning as much as possible, and yet you had to present the information. So you have to present the information, but you got to do it in such a way that the students will either fall asleep or just simply not care. So what are some ways, you're thinking about them right now, what are some things that we could do in the classroom? Okay, we could speak in a monotone. That's one of my favorites. In fact, I got to tell you real quick, I had a funny one. I had a monotone instructor in my undergraduate education that was a chemistry professor that used to look at the book and say, in chapter 1, that first paragraph there, that first sentence is really pretty important. You might want to highlight that one. Second sentence, not so much. There's fourth sentence. That's a good one. Just like that, just a draw. So that's a good one. Yes, another one?
Well, I was going to say, actually read it.
There you go.
Lecture, and maybe stand behind something.
Ooh,
Not move.
you got two which are good. One is to read the material, actually physically read it. And another one is to put a barricade between yourself and your audience. That's a good one too. So we got monotone, reading, barricading. Yes? Act uninterested. One of the biggest things you've got for anybody trying to sell something is that they have to convince you that they believe in the product that they're trying to sell. In education, if you don't care about the material you're presenting, you're not selling it at all, and it's really hard to see any value in it. So acting disinterested would be good. A couple more, yes?
I could teach anatomy without visual aids.
Ooh, no visual aids, all text. All text material, nothing visually. Very good. Avoiding eye contact, another very good one. If you stay away from actually looking at people and engaging people. So we avoid eye contact, we use only written materials, no visual aids at all. We can be a monotone, we can put a barricade in there, we can read to people. Got one or two more? Yes?
Pointless exercises, just to do an exercise.
That's a very good one. Pointless exercises. It's really difficult sometimes to determine when an exercise is pointless.
Well, if you
Because
convey the point of why you're doing it, and
Yes.
the reason behind it, and the students understand it. But otherwise, they feel like, oh, I'm just doing a ditto sheet or something.
that is an absolutely perfect point. It's difficult sometimes to understand from the student point of view what is an important exercise and what is just grunt work. Why are you just doing it to do work? There are some faculty members that explain to me that they're extremely rigorous. I have my students do 150 problems for every class period. You have not described any amount of rigor to me yet. You've described to me work, but if it's a math course, if it's a statistics class, and what you do are addition problems, 1 plus 1 is, 2 plus 2 is, 3 plus 1 is, you could have students do 150 of them, it wouldn't mean anything. The really neat thing about this point, which I really like, is the students have to understand there's a point, or else it is perceived as pointless information. So when you're handing things out to explain why. So the bad thing to do, just handing stuff out. Have this done by Tuesday. It's a really good point. Okay, one more. Yes. Good one.
Never checking for questions. I can remember sitting through lectures and I'm lost after 5 minutes, but if the professor keeps going on and on and on,
Yes.
by the end of the lecture, questions are relevant.
Never checking for questions. I think that's a really good point. There's something out there called Classroom Assessment Techniques, CATS. Classroom Assessment Techniques. Tom Angelo has a wonderful book out on this topic. And essentially what that is just checking for feedback to see, or getting feedback. Are you getting the material? Are you not getting the material? Because one of the things, and I think what you're getting at, which is right in there, to create a boring, apathetic kind of class is to lose your audience. Because once you're lost and you don't know what the person's talking about, there isn't a real reason to pay attention from that point forward. And so keeping people in that realm of understanding what's going on, quick checks are very important. By the way, oftentimes it's metacognition, knowing what we know. Oftentimes students don't even know when they know the material. We often don't even know sometimes when we know something. If you've been to a friend's house a couple times and he's throwing a social gathering and says, do you need instructions? You haven't been there for 6 months. You say, nah, I can find your house easy. Sometimes you're on the cell phone shortly after that, calling the person saying, I'm kind of lost, and here's where I'm at, and I thought you lived over here, but I guess I'm wrong. The point of thinking you know where they are, turns out you don't, is a mess. Is when you've made a mistake in this metacognitive process. I thought I knew it, but I didn't. One of the best ways of testing students to see if they know materials is to ask them questions. We often do that for exams, but what you have to keep in mind, and I think the point here too, is we need more than exams. Almost every class period, have the students respond in some way. In my class, I put up multiple choice questions that look very similar to what the exam questions will look like, and about every 15 minutes in my class, I stop and say, let's take a look at this one. How many of you think it's A? How many B's? How many C's? How many D's? And when I get done, if I look around the room, and I just have them raise hands, and when I look around the room, if they're not getting it, I say, turn to your neighbor and talk to your neighbor for a few minutes. I did this just a few days ago. It was phenomenal. William James promoted which area of psychology, and they had a choice between functionalism and structuralism and behaviorism and psychodynamic, and about half of the group had it wrong. I said, okay, turn to your neighbor and talk for a couple of seconds. Gave them literally 45 seconds. Said, now, how many A, how many B, how many C, how many D? Easily 90% of it the students had it right after they talked for a few seconds. Now, of course, there's clickers, and you could use those too, and there's more advanced ways of doing it. The point is somehow getting the feedback. So, all of those together, those are some really good ways of creating boring classes, which obviously if you don't do those things, you move toward more excitement. Now, the reason I did that and the reason I think it's important is it's easy to forget these things. One of the things I'm hopeful that most of you will get out of this presentation today is not necessarily, and I do hope you get new material, no doubt there. But even if you don't, even if you just think, gosh, that seems kind of obvious. Okay, well, I could do this, 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 and this, and you come up with all of your own stuff, but what you're thinking is, I never stop to realize that maybe the way I'm presenting and have been presenting for the last 5 years isn't most conducive to learning. Maybe what I need to do is just think about how I'm presenting it. So again, that would be fabulous if we just get that out of it. A couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing this, and I just want to jot these down real quickly because I think these are important to keep in mind in any realm. There are 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. Chickering and Gamson did this a long time ago. Steve Ehrman has done it with technology as a lever. How can we use technology to reach these things? The point is, as you're thinking about your course, as you're thinking about your students, there's some things you always want to go for. Number 1 is a connection. How can you make a connection with your students? You could email back and forth. You can go to class a little bit early and have a conversation with them. There's all kinds of different ways. But one of the things that we know is one of the number 1 determinants of whether a student comes back to school when they go their first year, whether they come back in their second year, is if they've made a meaningful connection with anybody. So making a connection is important. I love to tell this real quick story. A student come up to me one day, said, Dr. Z, could you write a letter of recommendation for me to go to graduate school? I said, well, I can, but you know, I only had you in 1 class or 2 classes, I guess it was, and that was a little while ago, and I don't know your work very well. And she said, yes, but I've got 2 other really good letters, and I need a 3rd one, and you're the only other person that knows my name at this institution. Now, I'm hoping she was wrong. I really hope she was wrong. But her perception was, as a graduating senior, she didn't know 3 people who could write letters for her and knew her name. I mean, that's just amazing. So the point of just making contact with students, really, really important. Another one is reciprocity and cooperation, getting students to work together. Whatever you can do to get the students to work together. Reciprocity, cooperation among the students. Using some kind of active learning. We want to do something that gets people actually actively involved in the material. I'm going to do a couple of things here in a few minutes, but the point here is using some kind of techniques. Feedback, getting information back to students. It can be done in several ways in terms of feedback. One, obviously, are exams, papers, those types of things. And really, I guess, my mind goes off in all these different directions. Be really careful with how you do feedback and how often you do feedback. It occurred to me a while back, if I give 4 exams and a term paper in my class, and we'll just say they're equally weighted, so everything's 20%. And the first time the students ever get any real feedback in my class is their first exam. So you take that exam, you get it back, and you got an F. My first college exam was an F minus minus. I went to the instructor and I said, F minus minus, I don't quite understand this. He says, oh, well, geez, Todd, that's easy. You got like a 43%. A 59 is an F, which would make a 49 an F minus. You're down below that. I said, okay, thank you. Now I understand what an F minus minus is. But it occurred to me in that particular class, which, by the way, I got 100% on the next exam, because then I understood what the instructor wanted. He is crazy, so I understood crazy. But I got that. I realized that I had my 43% and my 100%, which means I now had a C minus in the course. I was actually able to work my way up by getting all high A's on everything else. I got myself back up into the B minus category in that particular course. But the only thing that I did that was not A-level work was the first exam where I thought, ooh, I didn't understand that he was going to ask questions like that, because I was a first-generation college student right out of high school, and I didn't understand what college meant. My point here is, if you can give feedback on a variety of things, those questions that I give my students, I would have known on the second day of class that I needed to know this material at a better level. So just getting them feedback on different things. Time on task. a perfect example of good psychological research. We know that time spent working on things is highly related to how well you know it in the end. Yes, there are better and worse ways of incorporating information, but spending time on stuff is important. The reason I mentioned this is there's things we can do for excitement in the classroom that results in students really spending time with material. Send them on a web quest. Say, I want you to find 3 different types of resources on the web that pertain to this topic. And what you find is, it's kind of funny, students will come back and say, gosh, you know, I kind of got wrapped up in that project and I spent like 8 hours on it, because they start digging at stuff and going to other things, and the next thing you know, they've spent all this time on it. Give them a worksheet to fill out and they may not spend that much time. So clever ways of getting them really working together is huge. But getting the people to work on the task is important. Communicating high expectations is another one. At CMU, we're in the middle of a pretty big campaign about raising academic performance, and I'm using the new verbiage that Gary Shapiro is pushing. Raising expectations is nice. Raising academic standards is nice. Raising performance is ideal. What we really want to do is have our students achieve greater things. One of the most pervasive findings, persistent findings that we find in all of psychology and a lot of other fields, is that people will rise to the level they're expected to work at. If you put mice in a maze and then take out one of the runways, take an end out of it so they have a shortcut, mice will learn where that shortcut is very quickly, and they will use it over and over and over again. Organisms of all varieties will take the easiest route they can, and that includes undergraduates, faculty members, and even administrators. The whole concept here is, if you don't have to do a lot, we tend not to do a lot. So what we want to do is tell our students, I really expect this out of you. I did this, actually it's kind of funny how this works out sometimes. At a previous institution I was at, I love this one. Students were going through my learning and memory class, and we got to chapter 6, and someone said, Dr. Z, my book says skip on chapter 6. I said, really? I said, yep. I said, well, you know, those things will happen. It's a used book, right? And he said, yep. And I said, okay, well, those things happen. Someone else said, whoa, wait a minute. Mine says skip too. I said, really? I said, okay, how many of yours have skip written in it? And out of 40 students, like 38 students raised their hand. And I said, really? Show it to me. And sure enough, written right across it, it said skip. It was very obvious. Another instructor teaching the course had told the students to skip that chapter. So I said to them, I said, I know what you're going for, and I understand. I said, I can't tell other people how to teach, so anybody that you know that had this class from another instructor may sit in this class for the next week while we cover chapter 6. But once we get to chapter 7, they got to get out of here. And I told my students, I said, you know what? And I'm not saying that the other instructor wasn't setting high expectations. They did something differently, but I wasn't going to reduce something in my class because it had happened somehow somewhere else. So I said to the students, I said, I want you to know this material. It's important material, and I know you can get it. And when you're done, this is going to be a better experience for you. But again, it's pushing those limits instead of backing away from them. And the last one is respecting diverse ways of knowing. The concept here is to not do just the same thing over and over again, because when we do that, the problem we run into is that a certain sector of the students will be very, very successful and others will struggle. Most of you are very good at the type of presentation I'm doing right now. You take notes, I lecture, I don't even need a lot of graphics up here. If this were a class, my guess is almost all of you would do well in this. The reason I know that almost all of you would do well in this is that you are academic survivors. You have entered a system which tends to teach like this, and you have done well. Not everyone has. We've lost a lot of people along the way. A lot of my friends in school flunked out. People who have to have visuals and really need this other way of learning a material, they didn't go on to get the PhD because it wasn't there for them. So what we need to do is be very careful that we're presenting the material in a way that respects different ways of learning. Because the biggest shame for me is you got a highly motivated, very intelligent person that flunks out because of the way I teach. So I like to mix it up a little bit and try other things. The reason this is also mentioned in a discussion about apathy in the classroom, and most of you have kind of figured out the snag on this whole presentation, is that we create apathy in the classroom oftentimes by the way in which we teach the classes. One of them is if I teach in a way that really just is a certain type of learner, all those other learners become very frustrated, very apathetic, very lethargic about the whole process. So mixing it up is important. Now, one quick thing I want to point out, this whole thing's about pointing some different things out. You'll notice on the handout, I could have listed these 7 very easily. And had I listed these 7, you wouldn't have had to go through all that energy, those of you who did, of actually writing them out. It's a really good idea for students to take notes. And so when you're posting things like notes to Blackboard, PowerPoint presentations to Blackboard, be careful. If you give them all the material and then talk about that material, it's really easy for the group to get extremely lethargic. All the stuff's there for them. Those of you who are podcasting or trying some of our audio capture stuff, be very careful. Because when a person knows the material's there and they can get it later, there's not as much of a stress or strain or impetus to actually try. Actually, to a large extent, and I do this with my intro class too, it really drives them nuts. Sometimes I do entire classes with no PowerPoint, no audio capture, nothing else. I'm just talking. I pause periodically. I'm teaching them how to take notes. Go figure. I'm actually teaching my students how to take notes. And I'm doing that because they need to be able to learn in different environments. The next class period comes along and I have nothing but pictures up here. No words, but I have pictures of different things and then I'm explaining the concepts to them. Now they're looking at these things and the visual learners are saying, oh, I get it. And then they're drawing things and writing notes down. So it's important to mix it up a little bit. That's why I didn't list these for you ahead of time. By the way, for students taking notes, I tell my students this too, I love it. If you get frustrated because your students aren't taking good notes or you look around the room and nobody's writing anything down, keep in mind there's a huge difference between a novice and an expert. A novice does not see the nuances and the beauty of what it is that the expert is talking about. Kind of like if you watch hockey and you don't ever really watch hockey, the game looks a little chaotic. People who love hockey, there's all kinds of nuances. Or my absolute favorite, bottom of the 9th inning in baseball. 2 outs, a person on first base. Well, no, let's do this differently, it'd be even better. No outs, person on first base, you're down by 1 run, person steps up to the bat. I love the people who scream, get a home run, we're going to win, get a home run. The last thing in the coach's mind with a person on first base and nobody out when you're down by 1 run is to hit a home run. There's all kinds of nuances, but the nuances are there for the expert, the person who really knows the game. The one who doesn't, you don't know everything that's going on, shifting players and shifting batters and everything else. The point here is the students have a terrible time taking notes from you if they don't know what you're talking about. So I tell my students, I say, hey, here's some clues for you. Number 1, if I repeat something, write it down. If I repeat it, write it down. Number 2, if I spell it, Wundt, W-U-N-D-T. If I spell something, write it down. Number 3, if I write it on a visualizer, write it on a board or something, if I'm writing it, you might as well write it. Number 4, if there's a dramatic pause, you might as well be writing during that pause. So if I'm repeating something, if I'm spelling it, if I'm writing it, or if I'm pausing, then those are good times to jot things down. And it's the funniest thing, 200 students, I literally did this last week, and after I did this, and when I said, and a dramatic pause, they went, ooh. I love this, writing. And then I said, okay, psychology was founded in 1879. 1879. That's like 150 years ago. Ooh, 1879. And it was neat, because we went through it the first class period a little bit. And again, this whole topic of apathy in the classroom, these are intro students who are writing things. When I'm looking around the audience now, or looking around the group, they're writing stuff down. Periodically we stop, they're talking to their neighbors. It has a very different feel. You have to do something, because if you don't, this book by Bly is a great book. It's Bly 2000, What's the Use of Lectures? And essentially what he did is he collected heart rates of students. And what he found, which was pretty cool, is the heart rates across time. This time is about an 80-minute time span or so. And what they find is heart rates drop pretty consistently through a class period. And the reason that happens, of course, is much like what you're suffering through right now, is it doesn't take long and your brain starts to kind of shut down just a little bit. So I want to try something here. And this will be a challenge for those capturing this presentation, but then I always thought that setting high expectations is a good thing. So let's pass these out. Everybody gets a card here. And what we're going to do is on this card, here, Brad, you can take more to the back. Okay. I would like to try something, and mostly I'm trying this just to show you how you can do some things in the classroom. On this card, in like 1 minute, list whatever behaviors, and you can do as many as you like, what behaviors demonstrate apathy or indifference? When you walk into the classroom, when you're interacting with your students, what types of things do you see that you believe demonstrates apathy or indifference? Do we run out of cards, or we got tons of them on this side here? Vincent, do you have a card? Oh, you guys are all set? Okay. Oh, you didn't have anything to write with. That's good too. It's okay. Students not coming to class with pencils. There's a good one. ADHD people with scissors. Gotta creep some of you out. Okay. One card, Tim. Okay, apparently you're having no trouble coming up with things. That's good. Now we're going to try something, and again, it's something I like to do in class. This isn't the ideal scenario for doing it, but I want you to realize the affective component, the feeling for yourselves when you do this. What I tell my students is periodically I do the card passing thing. I'll just say, hey everybody, we're going to do the card passing thing. And now with classes of 200, I tell them just to rip off a piece of paper. If it's a class of 30 or 40, I'll pass out cards, especially if I want to collect the cards and do something with those. I think that's good. But what I tell them, and I would have told you ahead of time, I should have, I got a little excited about this thing, is we're going to pass these cards around, and you're not going to know where this card is going to end up, which is going to allow us to have a conversation about things that people in here care about, but we won't know who it is that actually came up with it, so it's very anonymous discussions. Couple of quick things. Number one, you have to tell your students, if you're the only person in a room writing with a big purple pen, you may want to write with something else. If you have very distinctive handwriting, you might want to write in a slightly different way. And statistically speaking, it's very likely that somebody in this room will end up with their own card back. It doesn't help at the end to say, hey, look, I got my card back, because nobody else is going to know. The other thing I mentioned is if there's an issue you really want to discuss, as soon as the cards are passing around, just step off to the side and write something down. Nobody's even going to notice it. And then keep that card when you sit down. And then you can say, ooh, here's a good issue. Now, the reason I do this, or the thing I do it for instance, in psychology, is let's go with drug use. You know, why would a person engage in consuming an illicit drug that may very well just fry their brain? Why would you do that? I don't necessarily want a student to say, well, I'll tell you why I do it. I'm just not interested. In fact, I had a student one time years and years ago that explained about LSD, insidious drug, gets into the mimics neurotransmitters, it gets into the synapse, it plugs in, starts causing firing in the occipital lobe, even though there's no external cues. You're seeing bright flashes of light. Just kind of a quick rundown of it. Young lady right in the front row, not by Bill over here, right here, said, oh, this guy knows what he is talking about. I said, okie dokie. And then I started talking about inhalants and what that can do to your brain. And she says, yes, nobody, you shouldn't do that. And I said, and my thought was, and this was when I was out on the West Coast teaching, I'm from Michigan and we're going to be covering sex soon. I don't want anybody talking about sex in my class. So we use this technique so we can talk about it. But now let's try it. Here's the deal. You're going to stand up and you want to try to make 5, this is kind of a cramped room. We're going to do 5 trades, but the first trade can't be anybody right around you. So you have to walk away from the people around you and do a trade. So quickly as you can, stand up and do like 5 quick trades here. You got to move quickly. Oh, and you only have like 30 seconds to do this. Yep. Nobody hit the cameras. Okay, we're good. All right, on your mark, get set. Okay, everybody. Wait a minute. John, you end up without a card? Did you end up without a card? How'd you lose your card? Does anybody have two? Okay, that doesn't happen often. You do want to be a little bit careful. I did this presentation at a lesser institution almost directly south of this institution, 70 miles or so. I'm just kidding, really I am. And someone at the end of that little session said, "Can anybody beat 8?" And she was taking them from people. Competitiveness. That's good. That's good. Okay, so here's what you do. Once you do that, first things first. Very, very first thing. Notice the feeling right now. Doesn't that feel better to stand up and move around a little bit? That feeling is something you should always keep in mind. If you're teaching a class that's over an hour and 15 minutes, 2 hours, make sure that people get up and do something periodically. There is nothing wrong at about the 30-minute mark of saying to a group in an hour and 15-minute class, you know what, just stand up for a couple minutes. Get everybody standing up and saying, okay, now for the next issue. Anybody have a point they want to add to this one? Now they'll look at you a little strange the first time you do it, and you have them answer a couple things and say, okay, sit back down. It's just the process of standing up and sitting down. You can ask people to stand up, talk to your neighbor for just a minute about this issue, and you tell them to stand up, not sitting down. Stand up and talk for a minute. Then sit back down, let's go back to this. That's that feeling you've got right there. We have to be careful because I get to keep wandering around. I feel pretty good right now, but you folks were lulled, the heart rate on that last chart, heart rate's going down. Now what you can do with the cards, which is neat now, is you've got lots of options. You could put people into groups of 4 and say, pick something on these cards that you think is a really important issue, whatever you've been discussing, and come up with a potential solution. So you could be teaching an engineering course and saying, what do you think the major components of bridge stability is? And if people can write it down, then you can have people now work in groups of 4, and you look at the cards and you say, well, somebody wrote this, and you can add your own stuff. But you got input, you got extra stuff. I think that's quite valuable. You can have whole group discussions. So let's try this real quickly to move on. I love this part. So what kind of behaviors, either that you had remembered yourself or what's written on the card, what are some good student behaviors of apathy? What are some of them you see on the cards here? We got some. What do you got on the card? Yeah. And I'll repeat them real quickly.
Sleeping.
Sleeping. All right. Actually, sleeping is a big one. It's it.
Reading the paper.
Reading the paper is a very good one. Reading the paper, sleeping. Got some more? Yeah. You had your hand up earlier, so it's good. No?
Body language.
Body language. Oh, the body language will tell you. By the way, the other thing you can do with this one, this technique is kind of cool. Everybody put a check mark next to the one on your card that you think is one of the best indicators. Everybody put a check mark on your card, unless you lost your card, in which case I'm apologizing for this. All right, you got one? Now here's the reason I had you just do that. There's some folks that have a really hard time getting people to participate in class. And if you call on someone who's really shy, we want to respect diversity in the classroom. Somebody who's massively shy and you call on them and they can't come up with something, they were timid about responding in class. Now they're really timid. And I've had people who are nationally prominent individuals that will freeze in workshops when they have to talk in front of a group. But now you've got a crutch. So I could go through here and say, for Rich, for instance, what one did you just check off, Rich? Slouching. Okay, what did you check off here? So what do you have? Sleeping. Another sleeping. That's good. We need another sleeping. And we had sleeping. And what did you have on yours? Another sleeping. Whoo. How about in the back? The 3 of you in the back. What did you guys come up with?
Reading other class notes.
Reading other class notes. Terry. And another sleeping. And?
Moaning when task is assigned.
Oh, that's a good one. Moaning when the task is assigned is what he said. So the point here is you can get a lot of dialogue going because you've got a lot of input around. So there's one last one here. Was that one? Okay. Couple of quick things. Number one is that task right there, or that project, whatever you want to call it, that activity is really good for getting discussion going. It gets people moving around that are falling asleep. It gets people now engaged. Even if you were lost, if you were previously lost in the material, you could look at what other people had written and said, oh, I get it now. And so you've got that going for you. All of those things can happen. Here's the really part that I find most interesting, though, in terms of this, is this whole concept of attribution. How do we attribute people's behaviors? When we say attributing behaviors, I mean, I came here today. To what would we attribute that? Why would I come here? Why would you come here today? And we can look at why people do the things they do. Driving down the road, somebody cuts you off. That's a behavior. There's a reason for that behavior. Now, the interesting thing is we don't know what the reason is, so sometimes we have to make an inference. And what we do is called a fundamental attribution error. I love this thing. For other people, we overemphasize dispositional things, things about their disposition, especially if it's a bad thing. Somebody cuts you off, they're a jerk. If you cut somebody off, you didn't see them. For ourselves, it's much more situational. I'm walking along and I trip and fall down, that's slippery, or there's a loose carpet tile. I watch you fall down and you're clumsy. So what we tend to do, it's a fundamental thing that humans do. And the thing we have to be careful is when we do this, we're looking out there at our students, for instance, and when we see behaviors, the first thing a human will do is go to a dispositional attribution. A person falling asleep is lazy or apathetic. What other reasons will people go to sleep on you? Why else would a person sleep in class, actually? Yes?
Well, I got 2 hours of sleep all week.
Yes. Or it's boring. There's that too. If the course is, let's do a combination. The course is boring and you only have 2 hours of sleep, and let's throw in the fact that it's 90 degrees in the room. If the course is boring, it's 90 degrees in the room, and you only have 2 hours of sleep, that's a pretty good reason for a person going to sleep, even if you take the boring course out. I've had students, and the reason I'm pointing this out is, yes, sleeping in class can certainly be apathy, indifference. It can also demonstrate extreme motivation. If a person didn't get any sleep last night, was called in to work a double shift, had a sick child, and they should probably just stay home, but they drove, spent 45 minutes looking for a parking place, and came to your class, even if you didn't require attendance, and then they fell asleep. And we sit back and say, look, I hate when students do that. They're just apathetic. They don't care. It could very well be that that student the apathy was they could stay home. So again, I want to just be careful of this. It could be that the student is indifferent, apathetic, not really caring about their education. Yes. It could also be something else. Looking at some of the other types of things, students showing up late for class. When people come into a classroom late, one of the reasons that they can come into the classroom late is that they can't find a parking place, they got a flat tire, other things can happen. And when that happens, basically you're looking at, I forgot to turn my cell phone off, that was awful. No, it wasn't me, but somebody turned mine off. Okay, I didn't even turn mine off. There's another one, cell phones going off in class. Do you know that last time I taught intro, and I'm going to use the last time because it was the whole semester, 200 students across 15 weeks. We got like 30 class periods. When you're looking at 30 class periods times 200 students, there's tens of thousands of opportunities for phones to go off. Happened one time the whole semester, because that was the day I forgot when I walked into class to say, okay, everybody, you ready for class? Let's get started. First operation, as you all know, is turn the phones down to vibrate. Okay, let's get going. Because I realized they do that on the airplanes. They always remind you on airplanes to turn your phones off. And I do that now in my classroom. So that's the kind of the thing. So the point is there's other behaviors that can be happening. Be careful that we don't attribute the wrong things. Reading a newspaper. I got a possibility for you why a student might read a newspaper in your class is I tell them it's fine to do it. In my class, they can do it all they want. Now, for those of you who would look at me askance and say, I always suspected he wasn't all that good. My rule in my class, oops, sorry, I touched the microphone, that's bad. My rule in my class is you can do anything you want in this class as long as you don't impede the learning of somebody else. So if you want to sit in the back row and you've got this stuff down cold and read a newspaper, I'm actually okay with that. It doesn't bother me. It might bother you, which is fine, which means in your class you should say something along the lines of, I really would prefer you not read papers or play Game Boys or work cell phones or anything else in this classroom. Now for those of you who say, well, why should I have to say obvious stuff because somebody else lets them get away with things? Be careful, because these aren't always obvious things. So for instance, I'll do a quick for instance for you. How many of you will let your students come to class late? If they show up 5 minutes late for class, is that okay? How many of you would actually either throw a fit or lock the door if a student's going to be 5 minutes? You're here on time or you're not coming. Okay, that's fine. But the issue here is the same student for these 2 classes now, they show up 5 minutes late for one class and the door's locked, they can't get in. They show up 5 minutes late for another class and they come in and it's fine. We have different standards for our students and different expectations, which I believe is good. I think it's good because when they leave here, there's all kinds of different expectations the students will face. What a student has to realize, I do this with my daughter whenever, if she's got a new job or a new experience, I say, talk to your boss about what it is expected, because people expect different things. And so the point here is, be careful about the stuff that's happening in your classroom. If it's bothering you, talk to the students. If they're reading newspapers, if they're sleeping, sleeping, I usually will catch somebody right after class and I'll say, boy, did you have a rough night? And 90% of the time they'll say, oh, you have no idea. And they'll explain it to me that, and oftentimes it is, double shift, kids sick, things are just awful. I had a guy show up for my class once, looked really, really distracted. And I said to him, I said, you don't, 200 students, I recognized him. After class, or before class, I'm sorry, just as class was starting, walked up and I said, you look a little disheveled. Is everything okay? He said, oh, my dad's going in for surgery this afternoon. He's got a brain tumor. And I said, excuse me? He said, yeah. He said, it's in Lansing. I got to go down. It's not until 3 o'clock. The class was at 11 o'clock. He says, after class, I'm driving down. I said, why are you here today? He said, I just didn't want to miss the material. When you've got students functioning like that, and yet had I just looked at him, he looked very disheveled. He kept looking around, kind of glazed over eyes. It would have been so easy for me to say, oh yeah, students like, they don't even care about the class. He's thinking about tons of other things. So it's just keeping in mind what's going on. Just be careful about this attribution. What I'd like to do is to finish here. I've got other material in here that I didn't get to because I wanted to bother you. Actually, the handouts have a few extra slides we can get to. I do have a pathological fear of running out of material, and I have thought about going to a psychologist, but I don't trust him. And so, okay, rewind back to the intro so you'll recognize that I'm a psychologist. But the point here is that I never know how long it's going to take, and I like to go with the flow of the class. So if it bothers you that you see something in the handout that you didn't get, just call me and we can talk about that too. I did want to point something out though. Recently I've been trying something new, and I just want to preface this with, please everybody pay attention really, really well for the next minute, because it's really important. I've been going to YouTube and pulling some materials for my class. And I never would have done that before, but my daughter was explaining to me as I was going through a concept and explaining it to her. She said, I don't quite get it. She went to YouTube, punched in the concept, and then she started looking through a couple of the slides there, a couple of the little movies, and she said, oh, okay, I watched a couple. She came back out of the den. I watched a couple of things on YouTube. I get it now. That's kind of cool. So you can do things like, I had punched one in here ahead of time. We'll see if it comes up. I got to be careful because, yeah, there we go. We're just going to leave the guy up here. We don't care. I punched in statistics and t-test. Now, there's a lot of perception about what's out there on YouTube, and here's the part you have to listen to. Never, ever show a YouTube in class without looking at it first. Now, I didn't get caught on this. I'm just telling you, you shouldn't ever show anything. If a colleague comes and says, this is a great video that illustrates the properties of the human musculature of the body, you say, oh, good, I'll watch it and then show it to my students. Because you never want to be halfway through and then turn it off and say to the students, yeah, sorry, that's not such a good idea. But I punched this in just for illustrative purposes, and what we've got is the dependent t-test, and this is an Excel spreadsheet. Someone's explaining the test. This is a lady who, it was a silly thing to do. I didn't like this one. But down here a little bit, which is one of my favorites, I don't even know if let me see if it'll show up, and then I can get it, I know I can. Oh, this one here, Gossett's t-test. The t-test actually came about from Guinness Brewery, that needed to take samplings of beer and determine if the batch was good or not. This is a 5 minute and 40 seconds of a guy from Britain explaining where t-test came from. And it's just, I used to do it. This is way better. Not only is it way better, as you can tell, I go over and talk a lot about stuff. I can show this, and I know it's 5 minutes and 40 seconds, and when it's done, we move on. So it helps me time the class. The only reason, again, I wanted to show that to you is that I am stunned at the amount of material. Whoops, I got it. There it is. It is a tough mouse. There we go. There's all kinds of stuff out there. So what I've been doing recently, I play this at the very beginning of class. I let something go, and then I put the students, I'd say, get in small groups and talk about this concept, and then we take off from there. So it's just another thing you can do to kind of liven things up. I'm out of time, so here's how I'm going to stop. The conclusion is this. There's all kinds of things that we can do in the classroom, and there's all kinds of things that the students do too. If their behavior is concerning you with respect to apathy and not caring, talk to them about that. If there's other things that you can try in classroom to make it a little bit more lively and interesting, then do that. But the concept is, don't just go into class thinking, gosh, I hate teaching this course, nobody ever cares, nobody wants to do anything. There's lots of things that we can do. Imagine a coach that basically says, you know, the players just don't seem to want to work all that hard, and we've been losing some games, and I guess that's just the way the season's going to go. It doesn't, from that point, you don't make a lot of progress. So I better stop. We're running low on time here, so let's just stop there.
Are there questions for Dr. Zakrajsek? Yes, we have one here. When done with the question, please pass the microphone forward.
Thanks for all your insights. One question that I have is related to the factor of time.
Oh.
Many of the things that you showed us today take time, and how do you work that in when you feel like you've got so much material to cover?
That's an excellent one. Content versus coverage. I mean, how do you cover the material, time and content? How do you cover the material when you have very, very little time? There's a couple of quick things. Number one, the activities need to tie in to teach them something. If that happens, the activity is worth doing. I don't like mindless icebreakers. I don't like things that don't pertain to the class. But things like the passing the card and then having people talk about the topic, you can get a ton of information from the students and get them actively involved in the material. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is you don't have to teach them everything. They're very, very bright individuals, and they can learn some things. So much like the card passing thing, if you structure that well, and I'll use the bridge example, and you really want to talk about strength of bridges, you do that card passing thing and then give them a quiz at the end of the hour, and I'll bet you anything that they will do every bit as well as if you stood up there and lectured for 50 minutes about bridge strength. So yeah, in fact, I'm glad you just kind of with us nodding there. There's really good data out there that suggests that it will be better response at the end that you'll get than lecturing. So yeah, but that's what it is. Quick kind of things, and having the students do meaningful stuff and having them learn it. Yep.
Other questions?
In fact, while the microphone's on their way back there, when I have smaller classes of like 40 students, they have a quiz every class period so that they have learned some of the material. Then I have them do some group work afterwards. That. Yes?
Can you speak a little bit more about student attention span? I know you said that it's important to, like every 30 minutes, you use 30 minutes to maybe have them get up and do something, but can you speak a little bit more about student attention span?
Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that one. I love to just, it's a little bit mean of me, so I'm going to tell you it's a baited kind of response. When I ask people, how long do you think the average individual can focus and really concentrate before they would need some kind of a break and mix things up? Now, I'm just, because of sake of time and because I don't want to bait anybody into this, when I do this in workshops all over the country, people will say 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I get all these responses, and I usually tell them my personal belief is somewhere around 4 to 6 hours. I think probably after about 4 hours, physiologically, you're going to run into trouble. And the reason I mention that is I watch my kids playing video games, and they can sit there, but they're actively involved in the process. So the real question is, how long will an attention span last when you're not actively involved in the material and you're fairly either disinterested or don't understand what's going on? Then it's really, really short. So the answer I'm going to give is kind of a convoluted answer. It's keeping the students involved in the material and doing things is really, really important all the way along. If you notice the attention span slipping, and you can get that by stopping and asking some questions, you can actually tell your students, hey, I tell you what I'm going to do in this class. I've got a lot of material I have to cover. If you find yourself nodding off or getting to a point where it's really hard to focus, don't wave your hand like this, but just put your hand up like that. And I'll nod, and once I nod and kind of look at you, I've acknowledged that that's the case. I'm going to push you a little bit, because everybody shouldn't bail as soon as they're uncomfortable. You should push them a little bit. But I'll tell you what, about the 8th person in this room where I see a hand come up, I realize I got to do something else. But again, that's a feedback mechanism. So you could do that.
Other questions?
think we got like a minute left here.
Other questions? Yeah. Excuse me, Todd.
Oh, yes.
Todd, if you could just speak real quickly on the value of having that PowerPoint in front, and even with the spaces to write some notes.
Yes.
I'm rapidly getting a bias against PowerPoints. In fact, this semester we're not using them.
Yes.
I put them online following the lecture, but I found that they follow me better
Without it?
without it. Right.
Yeah. There's some great presentations and some information out there. In fact, you can go on to Google and type in how to kill a presentation with PowerPoint. Kind of like when we started to how to create a boring course. I love the concept that education gets its technology from other areas pretty consistently. Overhead projectors, which turned into visualizers, near as I can tell, they came from bowling alleys. I used to be on a bowling league, and we used to write all the scores down, and all of a sudden they projected them all up so you could see everybody's score, and you could walk down and look at the scores. It wasn't shortly after that, it showed up in classrooms. PowerPoint was not designed for education. It was designed to make really high-impact, quick presentations in the business world. Educators thought, oh, this is cool, we can project stuff too. That concept, can you imagine a business meeting where someone's trying to sell a $50 million contract and they put up a slide with a whole bunch of text? I mean, it wouldn't sell at all. And so the concept is we have to be really careful. And so I agree completely, we have to be careful when we use it. I like it for big hits, kind of mostly to keep track of where I'm at. And here's some like major categories. But I really think we're overusing it to a great extent. And then that's why I told my students, first 2 class periods in Intro Psych this semester, I purposefully did not have any PowerPoint at all. I put the PowerPoint slides on the Blackboard shell, the students could get to them, and then I just talked. And I said, you folks are going to have to learn how to take notes from a conversation. And the very first class period, I talked for about 20 minutes and then stopped and asked some people, so what'd you write down during that? And they were taking notes. But again, you have to be careful how to do it, but yeah.
We have time for one final question.
Yes.
You want to show us the trick?
Oh,
Excuse me
the
again.
trick. You really want to know. It's like, okay, I'll do this, but do we have to do it on the camera too? I mean, does the whole world have to know? All right. Those of you who are watching on the camera, just hang around there and we'll just see. Okay. This is how it does. I'm going to show you, but I'm telling you right now, first of all, and yes, scissors should make you nervous. I got scissors here. Number one, it's not really magic. So those of you who really believe in magic, you're going to have nothing but disappointment right now. Here's how the gig goes. The piece that I cut. Sorry, I'll do this one. Oh, there it is. Take your article. Now I'm showing you because I actually do this in class, and the reason I'm showing you, and I'm going to have to come up with another trick sooner or later. I do this in my research methods class. Ask them to come up with hypotheses of what it is I did. And then they talk about it in small groups. You take your article, find a good article, ideally nothing on the back, and then cut it right underneath the headline, real carefully. Now you've got an article and a headline. Take your article and you turn it upside down. Now it's this text is all upside down, and I carefully tape it back onto there with some non-glossy tape. You guys didn't even think about it, but when I was showing it to you, I actually even put my fingers right there because I didn't want you to see the tape. Now you've got an upside down article with the title. When I turn this over, the first word here is goodwill. Okay, and you can cut it. I don't like goodwill anymore. I'm going to go with she. Now the top word is she. When I turn this over, it doesn't matter where I cut it, because when it hits the ground, she is the first word. So I go like that, I back up, and then you pick it up and you say, oh, she. So that's how you do it. I know, now you're disappointed because you thought, I thought it was magic. But I do that. So what I do is I do that in my class in research methods. When I first make the cut and I back up, I say, okay, get into small groups of 4. The null hypothesis is that I'm magical. So what are some alternative hypotheses? And then they come up with alternatives. I think we're out of time. We're out of time. So, in the famous phrase, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, by all means, give me a call.